Hello, everyone, and welcome to the KidzMatter Podcast, the place where you and your church take the next steps in your kids' ministry journey. We know you love Kidmin, and we want to give you the tools to succeed. Now, here's your hosts, Ryan Frank and Corey Jones.
Welcome back to the KidzMatter Podcast, episode 132. I am joined by Janine McNally. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Hey, so will you tell our friends who you are, because they might not recognize you by name yet. So who are you and what do you do?
Don't. So I'm Janine. I'm from Australia, originally a high school teacher. Came over the States I had done 3 years in a Bible college over there and spent the whole time doing Greek. And for some really weird reason, I wanted to do Hebrew. And it wasn't taught in Australia back then. So I came over here to Dallas Seminary, and that's where I met my husband. So I ended up staying, and that was 30 years ago. So we've been in church planting ministry, starting a church from scratch because he's a pastor, and basic pastoral ministry, women's ministry, and then most recently kids ministry. So yeah.
Did you learn Hebrew though? Like, did you finish taking it, or did you toss that one aside when you found your hubby?
Well, the funny thing was when I started it, it was right around the time when I met him, and so
your grades weren't that good
in August, and so that's when the semester began. Right, school starts in August, and it went through to May. So that was the first year of Hebrew. And then we got married at the end of the following August. So the second year of Hebrew was jammed into the summer while I was prepping for our wedding. So what do you think?
Yeah. Well, like someone told me, you went to college, you got your MRS degree. So.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So honestly, I learned, I've still got some Greek, which I'm realizing with my classes I'm taking right now, but Hebrew, they were silly because their vocabulary wasn't cumulative. So you didn't have to remember it from test to test. So I would shove in 20 words and out they'd go for the next 20. So yeah, no, Hebrew did not stick.
Well, other than speaking Hebrew and Greek or reading it or knowing some, you also have a ministry of your own, Grace for Kids.
Yeah. So when I stepped out of kids ministry and reflected on the things that I didn't have time to do while I was in kids ministry, I decided that's what I wanted to try and do, to create resources for children's pastors who don't have the time to do it themselves. So I started Grace for Kids a little over a year ago. So we're new. It's just me. People say, so where are you? And I'm like, in my house in Jensen Beach, Florida, because I think they're thinking it's an organization. I'm like, nope, it's just me. Right now, you want to volunteer? I'd love some help. I have so many things I want to do, but I just haven't got time.
So you've got like activity books that people could print out for their kids. You've got some leadership training courses, just all things that KidMin leaders need. But as cool as that is, that's not why we had you come on the podcast. I mean, that's cool and all. We love it. But you're like our resident expert on Generation Alpha. You've, in fact, is it officially out?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
You have just released your book all about Gen Alpha called When You See Fireflies, right? Did I get it right? Yes. When You See Fireflies.
This is the bad version, because I don't know if you can see on the very back cover, read that first name in yellow. Oh, you can't, it's backwards, isn't it?
Oh no. Dr. Jim Weidmanil.
Jim Weidmanil.
Oh, no.
And at the last conference I was at, somebody noticed, I didn't think Jim was a doctor. And I actually looked it up, and he does have his doctorate, but his name's not Weidmanil. So
if you autograph those copies, those become worth more later, right? Because there's a typo.
There's only one.
Hey.
The rest are all good.
So before we talk about the book, which we're going to get into, will you just kind of kick us out and tell us who is Generation Alpha and kind of what makes that generation more unique than all the other ones before?
Sure. Well, I ran across the term Generation Alpha about, maybe a bit over a year ago in a footnote that was written by an Indian professor of psychology in India. He referenced Generation Alpha, and I'm like, you probably want to know why I was reading that anyway. I have no idea. I don't remember, but I'm like, who's Generation Alpha? So I started Googling And there was very little out there. And I mean, very little. The one thing I stumbled across was a book called Generation Alpha by Mark McCrindle. He is an Australian he's the one who actually coined the term Generation Alpha. So
Which made you feel like a little more like, yes, fellow Australian.
Of course, he's an Aussie. In fact, my family members have heard him speak, which is pretty cool.
How fun.
Yeah, I know. So he's a social researcher, and he's actually a Christian. He's a believer over there in Australia, and they do research on all sorts of things. But one of the things they really focused on for a while was Generation Alpha. And about 12 years ago, they knew that the new generation had started, and they're like, what do we call these kids? No one's coming up with a name yet. He did a survey, and a lot of people said, let's call them Generation A, because we've just finished with Z. And he said, no, this is a new generation in a new century that are going to be completely different. So he started thinking about hurricanes, how they go through the Greek and Latin alphabet, and started over. So he came up with Generation Alpha, which is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, which means that the next one is probably going to be Beta. And he wasn't sure that it would stick, but it seems to be sticking. So now people are just starting to realize that they're here. Alphas. And if you Google alpha now, you'll find that there's more stuff out there, even in a year since I looked. But nothing had been done about children's ministry in churches. And I actually contacted him and said, do you think what you found would correlate with America? He said, absolutely. No, very similar. And have you done any research on children's church, kid ministry, alphas in church? He said, none. I'm like, that's what I'm going to write about. So that's why I wrote my book, was they're already here. The oldest are already in youth ministry. The kids we are working with right now, they were born 2010 through 2024. So the 2010s are turning 13 this year.
Yeah, because my son he just turned 12, and he's just like year one of alpha.
Yep. And the brand newies haven't been born yet. That'll be next year, will be the last year for them. So they're a different breed. I was just at our daughter's graduation party the other day, and a family member who's not a believer, she is actually my niece, but she's not much younger than I am. She is a pediatric speech pathologist, and we got chatting about alpha, and she said, aren't they an interesting generation? And I said, they are. And because she knows we're Christians, and that I worked in the church, she said, well, I had a kid that I needed a client. I had to go see. She was about 5 years old. And she said, I went to their house. I sat down on the floor and I just observed. And this little girl was sitting there on her iPad. And she watched, and she said to the mother, you know what you need to do? You need to take the iPad away, get down on the floor, play with your kid, and talk to them. She said within 3 months, there were no issues at all with the speech. So it was just interesting hearing from her, from that perspective, how you can see the difference in these kids. We were at a restaurant the other night, and to the left, there was a family with about a 5 and a 7-year-old girl. And you know those kids menus where they've got the pictures on one side and the menu on the other? The restaurant gives them to you with a set of crayons. Well, that was all pushed to the side, and the two of them were sitting on their iPads and playing. That's Generation Alpha. 2010 was the year when iPads were invented or released, and it was also the year when the word of the year was app. Pretty ironic, huh? So these are the kids, they're born into technology. Most of us had it introduced gradually. These kids, it's there from the beginning. So that affects so many aspects of their lives.
Yeah.
Just with that.
Man. Okay, so there are digital natives is a term that we've heard before. They're ruled by technology. Social media, I know, plays a really big factor. What are some of the other defining characteristics that set this generation apart?
Well, I think COVID is going to be one of the biggest defining factors. I don't think we've seen yet just how big of a factor that will play. But spending 3 years in those crucial time with their face covered, socially distanced, they weren't able to leave their homes. They couldn't go to grandma's house. They couldn't play with their friends. Zoom fatigue became a big thing. I know I was in kids ministry at the time, coming up with ideas that we could do with kids on Zoom, and they just got sick of it. They wanted to be face to face with people.
Yeah.
So COVID, I think, is going to be a huge factor. We're seeing it with Generation Z, with their mental health issues and the loneliness and their anxiety. It's all going to play out, I think, with alphas to come.
And it is like earlier than ever, the statistics about kids, like 5-year-olds are on antidepressants already. They're 5.
Yeah. It's not pretty. The whole thing is not pretty. So yeah, they're going to be, and those factors, just the very nature of the technology, like you said, social media, that's where they get their identities from. A false persona that people put out there to say, look at me, how wonderful I am, when in reality they're not. And you think they're engaging with people, but they're really not. They don't know how to have a conversation with somebody face to face. There's a whole bunch of, instant gratification issues, just a whole lot of things that come as a result of technology. I could go on for hours talking about it, but grab my book and read.
We can't give everything away.
There you go.
So do you think that the parents of Gen Alphas have kind of created the mess? I mean, those parents are sitting there at the restaurant. They're sitting there and they're letting their kids play on the iPads instead of is that a big factor? Did the parents kind of cause the problem?
I think it's certainly contributing to it. So they're the millennials. They are probably modeling the kind of life they were given by their parents. We tend to just follow along. They're probably finding, the path of least resistance here. Take an iPad and play because I'm busy. I've got to make dinner. Grandma and grandpa get tired, so they hand off, their phone or whatever. It's an easy entertainment default to go to.
And it's their world, it's everywhere. They're playing apps in school. When I went through school, that was the highlight of the week or the month when we got to play Oregon Trail in computer class. That was fun and special. And my family was pretty cutting edge because my dad in the early 90s, he was into computers. So we had MS-DOS before people had it. And we would have birthday banners printed out. We had Duke Nukem on the computer. We had these things, but they weren't that good. And it was a treat to get to do them. But now preschoolers or kindergartners, they've got apps during learning time at school because it's there and it's
by the age of 2, they can handle using apps, and they just touch the screens, bing, 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 bing. They're not afraid to give them a try. See what happens when I do this. Me, I'm the whole world may blow up, so I'm not going near that button. And it doesn't frighten them. A friend of ours said recently, she's got a couple of young grandchildren. She goes, I'm so sick of seeing them with the iPads in their hands. How do I get rid of them? And I said, you know what? It's here to stay. It's naive of us to think that we can remove it from their lives. But that doesn't mean we can't put healthy boundaries in it. So are parents to blame? Maybe partly. But you think about it, during COVID, technology was the solution to the issue. The laptops became their classroom and the iPads were their childcare while mom tried to do her job remotely and watch the kids at the same time. So in my mind, there is a bad side, but there's also the flip side where we're going to see these kids become unbelievably expert in the use of technology and robots and 3D printing and in artificial intelligence. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the headlines I'm seeing right now, but for them, that's their world, and they will lead us through that. So, in my book, one of the chapters is addicts or experts. I think they're a little both. They are addicted, but they're also becoming experts in that field. Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit to now the church. We get that it's a new ball game with these kids. And that includes how we church leaders are ministering to Generation Alpha. So what do we need to be doing? What do we maybe need to be aware of?
Well, I think we're aware that it's here. The trend I feel like I'm seeing, although I think I'm starting to see it turn, is, oh my goodness, we have to wow these kids. If we don't, they're going to roll their eyes and stare at the ceiling. We have to do something fun and bing, bang, bang, having lights and stuff. But the thought that we could wow them at a level that they're used to is fooling ourselves. Hollywood is way better than we will ever be. So I think while we need a level of technology so that we're not looking like we're putting a cassette player in a recorder anymore.
Though that might be such an amazing mystery device for them.
I do think that we need that balance. I love the idea. Carl Bastian's a friend of mine. You know who he is from Kidology. He pulls his puppet out every week. The idea of throwing a transparency on an overhead projector and have them going, huh, what's that? Wow. There's a sense in which the old stuff can be a wow. And I think we need to mix it up. They need variety. And I think we need that balance of using it and not using it. And even more importantly, what we were talking about before about them being a lack of engagement, we need to get down on the floor with them and talk with them, interact with them and build the relationships. They're desperate for meaningful relationships. And I think technology tends to be the default they go to when there isn't an adult to play with.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And you'll see maybe not with the younger ones as much, or just maybe my church is weird because our younger ones don't have their cell phones, but like teens already, they're all in the room together and they're texting each other. So like, but you're right. You're beside each other. Could you just talk?
No, I volunteered last year. We're looking for a church because we moved recently, and I volunteered at a church to help with their VBS. And I had the third graders, second and third graders, and there were several kids in that group that walked around with iPhones and paraded them, like, look what I have, and all the kids are like, wow, where'd you get that? And I'm like, why does an 8-year-old need an iPhone?
Yeah.
I just don't get it. That's a parent either giving in, well, thunder, can you hear that? We've got big thunderstorms here. That's a parent giving into the idea that they need to keep up with Mary next door, can do.
I had a 5-year-old once. This was before iPhones, but if you remember, like, I don't remember what they call, but they were the phones that they would have like 4 numbers in them, and mom would program what numbers they were. But I'm like, you're 5. Why do you need a phone? You have no one to call because you're with your mom.
You're always going to be with adults, so they can call for you.
Yeah, my son is 12, and the only thing he has a Kindle, so it's like little games that don't talk to anybody. And we did get him Kids Messenger, but the only people that he can message are me and my husband, and that's it. Like, I want to control who you're talking, because that's the other danger about so much of this world that they're in. There are all these hidden features. Like, I was seeing a post. Are you familiar with the Bible app for kids? In one of my youth group posts, they were posting how it part of the purpose of it is community. Well, then these parents are finding out that their kids are talking with people they don't know because of this. And I'm like, even on a Bible app, which should be inherently good, but people are not always inherently good. And I think that's another thing that we as KidMin leaders, we need to be training mom and dad. Do you know the dangers of what your kids are on? They're there.
It's like a security system, and that means the predators know that that's out there. What better place to get kids? And a Bible app, it's perfect.
Yeah. So we in the classroom, we need to be aware that, they're in the tech world, they're sometimes oversaturated with it. Their attention spans, because of living in tech, are different than other generations. Is there anything that stands out with Gen Alpha, maybe on like the spiritual side, that kind of like a learning level that they're at or not at, anything that spiritually makes them different than how we would minister to, if we've been in the game for a while, that we would minister to other generations?
Well, the thing that I discovered, and you probably know, it's pretty well known that we're losing 75% as they move into young adult. And that age is getting lower. That's a problem. As early as middle school, which means that makes preteen years absolutely critical for us to get them before they move into that stage. And one thing that happens at that 4th, 5th grade level is they call it cognitive pruning, where they start to snip things out of their life that they can't put everything in. So they snip out the things that they don't think is important or relevant. And the accusations that Barna study does talks about how the families and their children feel that church is hypocritical, it's irrelevant, and I no longer believe. And I flesh them out in my book, those three things. How can we become more trustworthy, more relevant, and how do we restore belief? And to me, that's the key, because if they think, first of all, that we're hypocrites, they see any hint of that and they'll turn in the other direction. And I've been doing a paper, I was just doing it before, on Matthew 23 and the woes of the scribes and the Pharisees being hypocrites. And again, my professor always wants us to apply everything, and my application is going to be to children's ministry, because the kids, if they see hypocritical stuff in the church, they want nothing to do with it. They want genuine. And if we're busy arguing over the color of the carpet, or there's church splits going on, or any kind of abuse, they will run in the other direction. So we need to build trust back in with them. And as for irrelevant, I'm like, irrelevant? How can we be irrelevant? We have the answer. What is going on there, And I thought to myself, why are we irrelevant? What are we doing that's so wrong? And I thought, for example, the story of Noah and the ark, we tend to tell that story. It's a real nice story. They get on the ark, they're saved, and all the animals get to live and all that sort of stuff. But I've never heard anyone say, can you imagine how Noah must have felt with the entire town laughing at him for a year? I said, to me, that sounds a little like bullying. You guys ever have bullying in your school? Do you ever see kids being bullied? And take that story and translate it into real life, so that the kids get a chance to flesh out what's going on with them. It becomes relevant to them. Another thing I talk about is working to find ways to help them experience God for themselves, and the knowledge translating the 12 inches down to the heart. And I tell a story of our then 14-year-old. We were about to start a midweek program for the first time at our church. And I had divided the so-called kids that were going to come into 4 groups: younger, older, boys and girls. And our daughter was an assistant in the older girls class. And she said, Mom, I'm going to pray that we get 9 girls in my group. And I said, 9 girls, huh? I said, this is our first year. You got to remember. And I'm trying to play that balance between not discouraging her, but making her feel like this is a realistic goal. I said, honestly, I'd be happy if we had 20 kids total. She goes, no, I want 9. I want 9. For some reason, she had the number 9 in her mind. So I'm going to pray for 9. I said, go for it, sweetie. You pray for 9. By the week preceding, it was up to 7 girls, 7. And I was ecstatic. Yeah. And she's like, no, that's not enough. That's not 9. And the night came, and there were seven girls. And we were sitting literally at the registration table when the parents were bringing their kids for the very first program, and my phone rang. And it was a lady from the community. I didn't know who she was. She said, is it too late to register 2 of my kids for your program? And I said, no, not at all. I said, would you mind telling me how old they are and whether they're boys or girls? She goes, oh, it's a 3rd and a 5th grade girl. I nearly dropped my phone. She had a 9. And from that point on, I feel like that translated her knowledge of God into her life, and it became real. And that's what we have to do. We've got to find ways to make things relevant, because the world out there is just going crazy in terms of its indoctrinating humanism, and secularism and pantheism and every other ism possible. And we sit and tell nice Bible stories, and they call us irrelevant. So there needs to be that transition to application. And then the last thing I discovered, which I'd never heard of, have you heard the word knowns? N-O-N-E, known? It stands for no religion. And it's a group that is now, it's the fastest growing group. And 78% of the people who say they're a known say they grew up in the church. So they grew up in the church, and they're like, done, don't want anything to do with it. I'm not having anything to do with God or religion. He either doesn't exist or it doesn't matter. So somehow we need to restore belief. So those things I think are critical. And again, I could go on for hours about them, but we don't have time to do that. But yeah, my book talks about a whole bunch of really practical suggestions about what we could do to counteract those three things, the accusations they're setting out for us: hypocritical, irrelevant, and not worth believing.
And if we, the church, don't get on board, we are in a world of hurt, because this is the future of the world, the church, everything. And we're losing them because we're not effectively ministering to them. They're different.
I don't know about you, but 5 years ago, I would never have imagined that there would be a scenario where the entire world's churches could be shut down on a dime. And I think Satan was laughing all the way through that. As he saw it was gone. I mean, we adjusted, and I think some good things have come out of that. But wow.
But I think on the whole, across the US, I don't know about other countries, but we lost families because it was not important.
Yep.
And
that may have shown where they were at anyway, but at least we were having some kind of an impact at that point, and now they're gone. Knowns, no religion.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I see, I'm in a bunch of youth boards and online, and I see where children's ministry on the whole, on average, most of your children's ministers, they are standing firmly on the authority of Scripture. And then I see with youth ministry, that is not the case. Now, I know there are people who are, but just on average, the vocal voices on the online groups that I'm a part of, and they're larger groups, they're like, yeah, you don't have to teach the Bible as truth. Why would you do that? And I'm like, and this is what we're sending our babies to? We have to make sure they're standing firmly on the authority of God, because it is a crazy world out there.
And that's honestly why I created Grace for Kids, because I don't know about you, but when in my tenure as a children's director, I showed up for work and I spent the entire time running physically backwards and forwards from my office to the resource room, to the classroom, to this classroom, backwards. And I would just be running until I turned the lights out and locked the doors behind me at the end of it. And I did not have time to check everything. And there were resources we were using that, upon reflection, when I actually stopped and spent some time, I didn't like them, biblically speaking. And there were times when we would do things, shove a coloring page into the hands of a kid, had nothing to do with the Bible. It was just a time filler. I don't think we have time for fillers. And I wanted the gospel in everything we did, some kind of a purpose behind the games we were using, or, just activity sheets, or, anything like that. And trying to get parents engaged. Wow. That was honestly my biggest challenge. I was looking at a question, might have even been Ryan that put it out on Facebook the other day. What's your biggest challenge in children's ministry? And I would guess the number one was volunteers. And I was doing pretty well with that. But the second one was engaging with the parents. How do we engage those parents? And so I wrote 6 milestone celebration programs, packets, and they're on my website, to try to make every one of those milestone, capitalize on them. So baby dedication, when you give the kids their first Bible, so when they graduate maybe out of kindergarten or first grade, salvation and baptism and communion, and then when they graduate out of kids ministry, all occasions when parents are likely to come and visit. If you make a big deal out of it and don't just skip right over it, we just handed out the Bibles in class. And I'm thinking, if I'd had time to prep, and I could have created a class on what is the Bible, why we need to read it, why is it reliable, how do we use it, how do we look up a verse, how do I have a quiet time? That would have been a great resource, because you invite the parents in with the children, teach them.
We can't assume that mom and dad know that themselves. They might not. And if they don't know it, they can't teach their kids. And if you're not doing it in the classroom, you get an adult who doesn't know how to use their Bible.
Exactly. So it was under the guise of come and support your child. But at the same time, we snuck the gospel into the program and we reached the parents as well. So that was one strategy. I thought we could do that, so that's one of the first things I've done, is to write that. And I got to do my dissertation, and I'm working on, again, how do we incorporate the parents? Because if you don't get the parents, the chances of getting kids is very slim.
And I think with this generation, it's kid-led like never before. The kids, they rule the roost. They've got sports and this and that. And I have found, I actually answer this. It's Facebook week in Kidman Academy, and we're on the family ministry module. I'm the faculty member, and they're asking the question, well, how do I get my parents engaged? Like, I have a church of non-engaged parents, but I have found if I have the kids excited, if the kids want to be here, the kids set the tone. I did a Christmas cookie thing at my house because I love to bake. And why not have Christmas cookies at Miss Amber's house? And I had a family who drove like 30 minutes. Their house is pretty far away. You know why? Because the kids wanted to come. Yeah. So if you get the kids on board, make it fun, make it, all of the things, they're going to get mom and dad to come. And then mom and dad are happy to come because they do what the kids want to do. So get your kids on board. Not that it has to be that flashy. We're not entertaining them. It doesn't have to be flashy. It can be something as simple as you're having Christmas cookies at Miss Amber's house because Miss Amber loves you and wants to spend time with you. You're building that relationship, which leads to genuineness, like all these things that you're talking about that Gen Alpha needs. But you, the Kidmin leader, you got to sit down and you got to think these things through. How can you minister to them? Because this generation, it is like nothing we've ever seen before.
That's, I'll see a post where someone spent 4 days creating a VBS backdrop. And I think, I wonder if that's the wisest use of that 4 days. Maybe just buy a simple backdrop and spend the rest of the time brainstorming how to get the parents involved, or sitting down with kids, or taking them out for ice cream, or having them over for cookies. I think we need to really be careful how we use the time we have available to try to maximize where their needs are the greatest.
I think that's a really good challenge for our podcast listeners to walk away with today. In light of what you've heard about Generation Alpha, are you using your time the best way to minister to your kids? And let's be honest, you guys know, my Gen Alphas are different than your Gen Alphas and different than your Gen Alpha. Every group is a unique set of kids and families. So is what you're putting the emphasis of your time, is it the best spent that way?
Right.
So is there anything, tell us the name of your book again and where we can buy it, because I hope everybody's appetite is really whetted. I don't think that's proper grammar. I hope your appetite has been wet. You guys.
You see Fireflies. So when I was writing it, my writing coach told me how important it was to get a title that wasn't cryptic. And then I came up with a cryptic title. Actually, I didn't. My oldest daughter, I was talking to her. She's 28. She just had twin alphas. They're 3 months old, our favorite alphas. And she said, Mom, remember when we lived in Pennsylvania and the back of our yard was sort of swampy, and at night, as it started to get dark, the fireflies would come out. Mm-hmm. And her and her brother would say, can we go out and play? And I'd say, sure. And so when do we have to come in? I said, when you see fireflies. Mm-hmm. Why did I say that? Because they lit up the dusk and you couldn't miss them. They didn't have a phone in their back pocket to buzz and say what time it was, or even a watch on their wrist. So they needed something. They were completely absorbed in their play, and they needed something to say, hey, time to come in. It's getting dark. And I was like, I can work with that, because it's like, come inside when the street lights come on. Darkness is coming. There's nothing good ever happens at night. The world is getting darker and darker, and we need to take the light out to the kids and draw them inside while we have time, before it's too dark, before they get distracted by the things of the world. So when you see fireflies, you can get it on my website, or whenyousseefireflies.com, and Amazon and all good stores. And it's just had the ebook released, so that's really good for people overseas.
And Grace for Kids is graceforkids.org, and it's Grace the number 4, KIDZ.
Yeah, I tried with the S, but someone already had it. Can you believe that? A preschool in Australia. Hello.
And sometimes they're so expensive, to get the .org or the .com. When I tried to go with the .com after my name, it was going to be $500. I'm I'm not paying $500 a month for amberpike.com.
Oh my gosh, I was talking to somebody at the D6 conference just recently, and he was saying I need to get this. So I've got 5 domain names. Empoweringfireflies.com, JanineMcNally.com, whenyousseefireflies.com, graceforkids.com. I mean, I got all these .coms and .orgs coming out my ears. So yeah, Grace for Kids, or Amazon.
Now, when will the narrated version? Because I'm a sucker for accents, so I would totally just listen to you read it with your Australian accent.
In the front of my book, it has a page where it says, download the audiobook for free.
Well, hey, so whether you're a print reader or you prefer audio or ebook, you got them covered.
Yes, and I finished recording it about 2 weeks ago, and I've spent the last 2 weeks fixing all the little snippets that had to be fixed. Just sent the last file in yesterday, so I'm thinking any day now. If you've got that link, I will upload the audiobook as soon as possible, and you can just download it for free.
I love it. And I hope, podcast listeners, I hope this has been super helpful for you. I hope it's been eye-opening. Generation Alpha, these are our 12 through -1s, the ones that are not yet here, and they're different. So they need your attention. You guys know the greatest likelihood of a kid coming to Jesus is before they turn 14. So the next 12 years, you have to be intentional with that time. I hope you guys will go and get Janine's book. Go pick up When You See Fireflies, learn a little bit more about Gen Alpha, get some practical tips, because it's really, really important. Janine, thank you so much. Any last closing ideas, remarks, empowerments to our KidMin friends?
Oh, goodness, just hang in there. Gosh, I talk about in my book about how hard it is to be a kids ministry pastor. Honestly, I think we did church planting, and people say that that's the most difficult ministry, but I really think kids ministry is, with the low priority that you're normally given, how demanding the job is, the wide age range, the sensitivity required at that age, and with people's most precious possessions. It's just so hard. In my mind, it's the most critical, most important, most long-term ministry you can have. So don't quit, don't give up. Hang in there.
I love it. I agree. Awesome. Janine, thank you so much. Friends, go check out graceforkids.org. Go pick up When You See Fireflies. Holler at Janine on Facebook. She's on there. She's in our I Love KidMin group. And go and think about, are you effectively reaching Generation Alpha?
Sounds
all right.
good.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast, Janine. Thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you all soon.
This episode might be over, but the conversation is just getting started. Head over to the I Love KidMin Facebook group and let's talk about your next steps in your kids' ministry journey.